Life Insurance Corporation of India. Gratitude. Once again, warm welcome everyone to the Hindu Businessline Decoding the Budget 2024. This exclusive conclave shall address measures introduced in the country's Union Budget 2024, which focuses on education, employment, skill development, the middle class, amongst others. The budget, as we all know, has identified 9 priority sectors and also implemented significant changes to the capital gains tax regime. We shall also discuss measures announced to address growth in these priority segments. As we take the deliberations forward, I now request Madam Purnima Joshi ji, Chief of Bureau, the Hindu Businessline, to join us for the welcome remarks. Greetings. With a round of applause, let's welcome Purnima Joshi, Chief of Bureau, the Hindu Businessline. Ma'am, please.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to Businessline's Decoding the Budget session. I extend a warm welcome to our guest of honor, the Chief Economic Advisor, V. Anantha Nageswaran. A special greeting for our esteemed panelists, Professor Ashok Gulati, D.K. Pant, A. Balasubramanian, Jyoti Vich, and Sitakanta Patnaik, who will be deciphering the budget with my colleague Lokeshwari from Hindu Businessline. From the Chief Economic Advisor, we look forward to being informed on the broader themes that he has been emphasizing in the economic survey and even otherwise of the global environment, which is far more challenging now than our competitor countries faced when they were growing. The future of work with the adoption of artificial intelligence, the dichotomy between increased productivity with artificial intelligence and the challenges it poses in terms of disrupting employment situation. Another area where his ideas inform the discourse on economy and growth is the need to navigate energy security with the energy transition that we have been trying. We also look to him to shed light on the imperatives of employment and skilling. As the economic survey highlights, 65% of India's fast-growing population is under the age of 35, and many lack the skills needed by the modern economy. About 52% of the country's youth is deemed employable, which is to say that about 1 in 2 graduates are not readily employable straight out of college. We hope to understand how much the budget policy pronouncements address the concerns about these issues, particularly unemployment. Of course, the point about growth outlook, about why when everyone is talking about 7 to 7.2%, is the economic survey talking about 6.5 to 7% has been repeated ad nauseum. But if Mr. Nageswaran wants to add to the debate, we're all ears. I hope he would find time to answer a few questions after his address. We would be looking forward to that. We also look forward to today's panel discussion and be enlightened about whether the strong macroeconomic fundamentals highlighted in the budget and the growth trajectory of our country address the gnawing concerns that we still have about unemployment and inequality. Once again, we hope to be informed and enlightened by this discussion, and I welcome you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And now taking the program forward, it is indeed my honor to introduce our very distinguished and esteemed guest of honor, chief guest, Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran ji. Sir needs no introduction in the house. Still, I would take this very important occasion to say a few lines in honor of Sir. Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, sir, is the Chief Economic Advisor of India. Completing 2 terms in this pivotal role, Sir has been instrumental in shaping the country's economic policies and was a key figure in India's G20 presidency in 2023. Prior to this, he served as part-time member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council from 2019 to 2021. With a distinguished career in academia and the corporate sector, he is an expert in macroeconomic and capital market research. His contributions continue to drive impactful economic policies and address key challenges facing our nation. On that note, requesting everyone for a thunderous applause, and please join me in welcoming Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, sir. So greetings, good evening, welcome to the Hindu Businessline Decoding the Budget 2024. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be invited to share my thoughts with the distinguished audience here. So a big thanks to the host Businessline newspaper. Although my good friend Mr. Raghuveer Srinivasan couldn't be present here, I'm happy to see his colleagues and people like Lokeshwari, Sishir and others whom I have got to know in the last few years very well. Thank you for having me here. I'm also happy to note and quite good to see the presence of Dr. Gulati, Dr. Sitikanta Patnaik, Mr. Balasubramaniam and others. So I would like to convey my advance apologies to them because I just came back in the early hours of Monday from Brazil after the G20 meeting. So I have quite a few things to catch up. So I won't have the luxury of being able to hear what they have to say. But of course, I have the privilege of reaching out to them bilaterally, which I have been doing, will continue to do so as well. Ms. Purnima in her introduction said, although I have been quizzed endlessly on the economic growth outlook for 24-25, she still invited me to elaborate on that, and I will take up the challenge. I told the assembled journalist on July 22nd, although the economic survey had about 470 pages of content, it is that one paragraph in chapter 1 which has that economic growth outlook, which we all know as forecasts go, will always turn out to be wrong, isn't it? Because you please point out one economic growth outcome which turned out to be exactly right except by chance. So, in spite of knowing fully well that such growth projections are only pointers at best, and when it comes to their predictive power, they really have very poor track record, whether it is a forecast made by the international agencies or by domestic agencies, whether it is global outlook or the US growth outlook made by US Federal Reserve or independent Wall Street analysts, you name them, these are just signals or important indicators of the direction of risk, direction of where the base outcomes are going to be. I think in last year's survey in January 2023, I had written at that time, in fact, that the growth outlook was about 6.5%, and the downside risks dominated the upside risk. But it so turned out, again, I was remarkably wrong. FY24, so far the latest estimate we have is 8.2% for 23-24. So in that respect, if this estimate of ours of 6.5 to 7% turns out to be a remarkable underestimation, I'm not going to complain again. I'll be happy. But the reason why, compared to what we wrote way back in February, when we published the so-called interim economic survey, which is basically, we called it Indian Economic Outlook, Indian Economy a Review, which is what we called it. At that time, we said 7% was quite confident. But now we said 6.5 to 7, and the risks are evenly balanced. The reason we said it is, of course, as Ms. Purnima pointed out in her initial remarks, as well as citing from the economic survey, the world has indeed changed and continues to change, not necessarily for the better. And the survey talks a lot about how industrial growth outlook in the world is stagnant. global trade is now marred by frictions. Even after the exit of President Trump in 2020, trade actions have only exploded, have grown manifold. Restrictive trade actions have grown significantly even since 2020 compared to between 2016 and 2020. And then, of course, you have the geopolitical fragmentation with news flow every day hinting to us that the risks are, if anything, getting elevated rather than getting lower, etc. And last but not the least, of course, the monsoon. And as of yesterday, and since I've been looking at it every day like a student studying for the school final exams, I know the monsoon subdivisions and how many normals, how many excesses, how many deficits, how many large excesses. I kind of know them by heart now. So as of yesterday, of 36 monsoon subdivisions, we had 15 normal, 8 excesses, and 11 deficits. And I'm missing out on 2. There were 2 large excesses. Maybe they became excesses, no, not large excesses anymore. But basically the point remains that out of 36, only 15 had normal. The rest of it were either a deficit or excess rainfall, which actually, if you compare with what happened in the monsoon season 2023, is even more dispersed compared to what we experienced in 2023 season. So we need to understand the impact of this on actual production and yields and productivity, etc. And again, the other item that is keeping us cautious is the fact that the global financial markets have been elevated in terms of their valuations. And so far, since COVID, by and large, except for few weeks of indecision or vacillation, global financial markets have generally been on an uptrend over the last 4 years. And if you look at the United States markets, there are several indicators that tell us that this is the third most overpriced market in history compared to 1929 and compared to 2000, etc. And we know that when those markets correct, usually, and I could be wrong here, usually there are no hiding places in the world, because this is a law of financial markets that when the United States stock market goes up, it is not necessary that the other market should also go up. However, if the United States market corrects, so far history tells us it is both a necessary and a sufficient condition for other markets to correct. So that is also a risk factor to keep in mind, given how the politics in that country is evolving as we approach the last quarter of the current calendar year. Things could go anywhere, and naturally that induces a sense of uncertainty and indecision in the minds of investors, affecting consumer sentiment, etc. And then we also know that there is excess capacity in China has emerged in several sectors because domestic demand is very weak in China. And therefore, even our corporate sector, and by the way, and I have said it so many times, but we don't normally allow in this country facts to interfere with our anecdotal stories, isn't it? Our anecdotes and our stories matter much more to us than facts. And that is how the public discourse has been, especially in the world of social media. The fact is the private corporate sector has started to invest in this country, but I still don't get, nobody stops asking when will the private corporate sector start investing? The answer is they have. In 2021 and 21-22, yes, it is true, in 1920 and 2021, the non-financial corporate sector's gross fixed capital formation was on the weaker side. There were slight declines in those 2 years. Post 2021, i.e. in FY22 and FY23, there has been an impressive recovery in capital formation. You might say that bulk of the capital went to dwellings rather than machinery and equipment, or intellectual property products. These are the 3 components of private sector capital formation. But nonetheless, in 22, 23 and etc., even those last 2 important critical components of capital formation, machinery and equipment and intellectual property products, have begun to improve. And so it is not only the public sector that has been doing the heavy lifting, which was the case until FY22. But since FY22, private sector has begun to join the investment story, and it is continuing. We don't know the estimates of how well they did in FY24, but based on a small sample of 3,000 companies, we figure that it might have grown again in high double digits, the private sector capital formation. However, it is possible that at the margin, the delta may slow down because Indian private sector looks at the excess capital, excess capacity emerging in several sectors in China, the amount of imports that comes in, and therefore they feel that they don't want to be priced out of market by cheaper imports. So to that extent, they may phase out their investments or delay them, etc. So we don't know. So these are all the risk factors we took into consideration, which were not that prominent when we wrote the midterm economic survey or interim economic survey in February, pointing to the fact that 7% looked very feasible. But now we are saying it is still feasible, by the way. But we acknowledge that at the margin, some risk factors may have emerged. That is what there is to it. And of course, about the budget itself, I think I have seen, even though I was out of the country for the last 6 days or so, I have seen the kind of commentary, especially on social media, etc., about the capital gains taxation rationalization. Primarily, we should look at it from the point of view of the fact that we had multiple rates, multiple time horizons when something was considered short term, something was considered long term. So this is an attempt at rationalization, making it simpler, making it easier for you to remember rather than having to refer to some specialists and experts as to what is the rate, what is the horizon. Except listed markets, everything is now more than everything is now below 2 years is short term, above 2 years is long term, and the rate is 12.5%. There is no indexation. Now, this whole indexation business has really caught a lot of people by surprise, and therefore there is commentary that it is almost as if it is shortchanging the property owners in particular. But the truth is, it really depends on which investment, what is the kind of return that you are sitting on, etc., which will determine whether you are better off or worse off. It is not a provision which is, in fact, I would like to read out some statistics for you to keep in mind, and that should give you a perspective on whether it's really the middle class that gets affected by this particular development or not. In general, if you remember, if anyone sells a house with a capital gain of less than 2 crore each year, there is no tax if you reinvest that gain in 1 or 2 houses, right? And if you sell any house with a gain of less than 10 crore each year, there is no tax if you reinvest that gain in 1 house. If you sell any house with a gain of less than 50 lakhs each year, there is no tax if you invest in capital gains bonds. So the tax is mainly paid by those with multiple properties and not by the so-called middle class, because the middle class doesn't have multiple properties. Let me also read out to you the total population, which is more than 18 years of age, is 94 crores. Income tax filers is only about 8.2 crores. And filers with capital gains tax on property is about 10.5 lakhs. And the percentage of taxpayers is 1.3% of that. And therefore, the percentage of population greater than 18 years who are also taxpayers is 0.1%. So we are really not talking about, when we talk about rationalizing the capital gains taxes, 20% with indexation or 12.5% with no indexation. It is not that it is something that hurts the middle class in particular, because these are all not the statistics that would qualify for middle class. That is one point I want to make. And the second point that also has come up in discourses is about whether the government is over prioritizing fiscal prudence, because the interim budget had a gross fiscal deficit target of 5.1%, and now it has been brought down to 4.9%, despite the fact that in the meantime, Reserve Bank of India had given a large dividend payout to the government of India. It has been partially utilized, as you could see from the scheme announced for employment generation, for skilling, for internships, for medium and small enterprises, on energy security, on higher educational loans, etc. So there have been multiple new announcements catering to the question of employment and skilling, which I will turn to last. But the point is, when we talk of capital gains taxes, changes that have happened, I would like all of us to pause at least for a minute, if not longer, on how did the last 4 years of performance, and those of you who know about the Morgan Stanley Capital International Index, MSCI, which is an important benchmark for a lot of investors, portfolio investors. You please take a look at, it's available open access on the internet. I wish I had brought the statistics, but let me see. I'll tell you the statistics we have here. Okay. Give me a few seconds to pull it up. I will pull it up and share with you. Yeah. So we have, for example, if you look at the Morgan Stanley Capital International Index pertaining to India, what they call Investable Market Index, IMI, MSCI, IMI India. It is an investable universe of stocks, which is the benchmark. The annualized return over the last 3 years, annualized return in US dollars from MSCI India is 14.7%. Over the last 5 years, annualized return is 14.9. Over the last 10 years, 10.15, 10.2%. Now, in comparison, the entire emerging market universe over the last 3 years, annualized average return is minus 4.1. 14.7 versus minus 4.1. Last 5 years, annualized return, India 14.9 versus 3.9 for emerging markets. Last 10 years, annualized return, India 10.2. Emerging markets 3.1. I will refrain from naming specific other EM countries so that there is no need to individualize it here. But by and large, India has rewarded investors, whether they are domestic or overseas investors. Now, how could that happen? Of course, companies have done well on the back of the fact that they used the COVID pandemic very well to rationalize cost, etc., perhaps too well. That's a separate story. I'll come to that. But it's also the fact that the macroeconomic policies pursued during COVID and after COVID have indeed contributed to the fact that the capital gains accrued in the first place. So when we criticize the government of the day for certain tax policy changes, we also need to acknowledge the fact that it is the government's pursuit of such prudent fiscal and macro policies that in the first place paved the way for capital gains to arise. Whether it is 2014 to 19 investment in structural reforms, GST, IBC, real estate regulation, ease of doing business, and between 2019 and 24, investment in public infrastructure, investment in digital public infrastructure, and also ensuring the vaccination of the population so that there was no need for a national level lockdown after the first one, and also subsequent to the guarantees given to MSMEs, and subsequent to COVID, the emphasis on digital infrastructure, etc., and the pursuit of fiscal stability from a 9.2% deficit coming down to 4.9% with a target of 4.5% within reach. All of these things have basically created an atmosphere of macroeconomic stability and policy predictability. Conservatism in terms of GDP growth assumptions, conservatism in terms of therefore fiscal deficits, and ensuring that the quality of fiscal expenditure between revenue and capital shifted at least 10 percentage points in favor of capex over revenue. All these things have convinced investors that this is a place which now they can trust in terms of macro-prudential stability. That is why the inflation outcomes also, even at the worst of the after the pandemic and the Ukraine war, when commodity prices went up and supply chain disruptions were rife, we basically had a situation where India's inflation rate did not rise beyond 7.8% headline rate. Yes, food inflation is a challenge, has been a challenge in the last 5 years compared to the previous 5 years, and that is because the vagaries of monsoon have also become worse and worse, and that is something we need to think about with respect to our farm sector policies, and I'm very happy that you will have the benefit of listening to Professor Ashok Gulati in the panel discussion after this. And in fact, we have used many of his thoughts and writings in the box item that we have written in chapter 5 of the economic survey on what is an intelligent pro-farmer farming policies that we can adopt. We have used his insights and knowledge and wisdom quite a bit. So there are multiple ways in which we can ensure that farmers get their dues and also take care that the consumers do not end up overpaying for food. So the point is, macro policies have indeed played a very big role in generating the capital gains in the first place. And that is why I think before we take to social media or other outfits to criticize policy changes somewhat on an isolated basis. It is important to take into consideration the entire picture of what the macroeconomic policies have delivered in the last 5 to 10 years, both in absolute terms and in relation to what we see happening around us elsewhere in the world, elsewhere in the neighborhood, etc. And one of the things I used to say in the course of 22 and 23, in the last 2 years I've been here, the biggest difference that is going to be there with us for this decade compared to the last is that the balance sheets are in very strong position. And that is why I think a 6.5% growth rate can be taken as a baseline for us. Now the question is, can we do better than that? We should, we can, and we should. And that depends not just on the union government. And that is what the survey talks about. That is what, in fact, even the budget talks about quite a bit. Putting a lot of emphasis on state level reforms and actions as well, giving incentives for states to pursue those reforms, etc. Because if you look at the budget speeches in several paragraphs, the Honorable Finance Minister has spoken about in collaboration, in cooperation with states, etc., come at least 3 times in the budget speech, if not more. So states and local governments have to contribute towards deregulating the economy, which is where employment generation happens. And we still have overall regulatory ecosystem that actually puts greater emphasis on catching the delinquent rather than letting the innocent get on with economic activity. So that is an area of action. And second, I spoke about the private sector. The private sector, as you all know very well, post 2019 tax cut, etc., and in the context of COVID, had trimmed itself very well in terms of balance sheet and costs, so much so that the profit before tax of about 30,000 plus companies sampled by CMIE, the profit before tax was 5.3 lakh crores in 2020, FY20. And by FY23, this has grown 4 times to 20.6 lakh crore rupees. So by all accounts, private sector has done remarkably well. Now it's important for the private sector to think about, therefore, the kind of capital labor balance it has, the kind of contribution it makes to aggregate demand generation in the economy, because ultimately the more you control cost through automation, the less there is source of income and demand for the products themselves going forward. So what is the horizon that the private sector is looking at in terms of optimizing its profitability? If it is only short term, then of course you will continue to optimize on cost by substituting capital for labor. But when there is no labor income, there is no employment, there is no demand growth either in the economy. So that is a question that the Indian private sector has to ask itself. And we have discussed it quite threadbare in the economic survey as well. So therefore, given the global context I described, and given the global context that we are going to stay with, unfortunately, in the next 15 to 20 years, it is important that all of us understand that for India to be able to realize its growth potential and meet people's rising aspirations, people are no longer satisfied with the progress we have achieved. That satisfaction lasts for a bit before it fades away because aspirations take over. And in that context, we need all levers, private, public sector, academia, and union and local and state governments to pull together. And more importantly, we also, in the world when everything is moving towards more intervention. Barely 40 years ago, Mr. Ronald Reagan said government was the problem. And Mrs. Margaret Thatcher celebrated inequality as a sign of economic growth and dynamism. And today, one of the priorities of G20 is tackling inequality. And one of the active policy pursuits of governments today is active industrial policy, friendshoring, nearshoring. I spoke about protectionism. So we have come a long way in the last 40 years globally. Therefore, but we don't need to necessarily swing with the fashion of the day. And India has an opportunity to strike the middle path. We don't have to subscribe to either capitalism or socialism, but to pragmatism, where the situation, the need and the context define whether there is a need for intervention or whether there is scope for letting market forces do their part. So this is an opportunity, therefore, to strike out and to carve out our own path and be able to actually be a beacon of economic policy and wisdom to the rest of the world rather than aping the fashion of the day, whether it is artificial intelligence, whether it is climate change or emission mitigation. India does not need to follow the conventional wisdom. If anything, conventional wisdom has conventionally proven to be wrong in the last 4 decades, and the West, sometimes when they discover that they are wrong, they have no shame in turning course 180 degrees, and we should be mindful of that. And therefore, both the survey and the budget have a lot of convergence, and the budget continues the path of macroeconomic stability. Today, if you look at the interest rate of India for 10 years is 6.92%, and India has a BBB minus credit rating. Indonesia has a BBB credit rating, and its 10-year bond yield is 6.9%, barely 2 basis points lower than India. Now, you look at the 7-year government bond, India's rate is close to the 6.9 that we see for the 10-year, but the Philippines, for example, which is a BBB plus, India's BBB minus, 2 notches above India. The Philippines 7-year borrowing cost is 6.1%, ours is 6.9. So if we continue on the path of fiscal prudence, not necessarily fiscal austerity, but fiscal prudence, and if we are able to improve our credit rating and the cost of capital comes down by 30 to 40 or 50 basis points, that in itself is an extraordinary fiscal stimulus that the government will be delivering. And that is the kind of policy framework that we continue to adopt, and that is what we have delivered. And therefore, more than looking at the short-term disruptions that may be caused by the capital gain tax changes, etc., we should be very happy with the capital gains themselves, which have been accruing as a result of the government policies. And these policies continue to underpin both the growth outlook and the financial market outlook for India in the coming years, notwithstanding the global challenges. So I'll conclude with the Stockdale paradox. I spoke to the media people last week. The story of James Stockdale, the Vietnam War veteran, is well covered in the famous book Good to Great by Jim Collins. You should read it. One of the few people who survived being captive in the Vietnam prisons is James Stockdale, and he said those who perished were the optimists, because they expected to be released any day, and when that day of release never came, they became depressed. Whereas James Stockdale was upbeat about the long-term prospects, but he was also alive to the ground reality of what he was looking at and how strong his captors were, and therefore how long he would be kept in custody, in detention, etc. So he managed to combine a sense of positivity, optimism with realism, with being feet on the ground and being aware of the challenges and the gravity of the task that we need to pursue. That is what will take us to the goal of whatever we want to achieve. Ultimately, what is in our control are the actions. Outcomes are not in our control. Of course, I don't claim any originality to this statement. It is owed to Lord Krishna. So on that note, I will conclude my talk. Thank you very much.
Once again, everyone, a thunderous round of applause for that very stimulating keynote address by Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran, sir. Sir, many thanks. Sir, we request you to be there with us. At this hour, may I invite Madam Purnima Joshi on stage to conduct the question and answer session with Dr. Nageswaran, sir. We also invite questions from the audience. You are requested to raise your hand, introduce yourself briefly before asking the question. Thank you.
So, Mr. Nageswaran is available for a few questions, and before I throw open the floor for the audience to ask a question, I have a question of my own, sir. Is that you talked about fiscal prudence, not necessarily austerity measures, but prudence. And I would like to ask you about, in the larger context of having so much thrust on capital expenditure, and a revenue expenditure that has kind of gone down, if one has seen in the last 3-4 years. And you look at areas like particularly education and health, which are somewhat being squeezed. And we have a situation where a class 5 student cannot read or write class 2 standard text. So in that situation, do you not feel that a major influx of capital into human resource development is needed in a country like India, where you're still facing an issue of skill and skilling in unemployment?
So I acknowledge the underlying issue that you raised, which is that yeah, we have a lot of catch up to do on learning outcomes and skill development, etc. But tell me if there is an empirical study that correlates more outlays with outcomes. There are states that spend less but spend efficiently, which have created the kind of learning outcome that we are seeking. No amount of money that you spend can ensure that teachers actually attend the classes and teach instead of having their own tutorial outlets outside. And by the way, education, if you look at the total outlay of states and the center together, we are actually spending quite a bit on education per se. I think the kind of learning outcomes we are seeking are not a function. In fact, in a somewhat unrelated area, we have a return in the economic survey as to why the Manrega spend is not a true indicator of rural distress. And we have given the reasons on the logic behind it, because different states have different minimum wages and different administrative machinery efficiency, which is the reason why, despite the low levels of poverty there, they end up having actually greater Manrega spend. I'm just using that example to point out that actually higher spend is not an indicator of higher outcomes or better outcomes. And we need to therefore make sure that what does the system lack? Is it a lack of financial resources, or is it something else? Is the public policy configuration that prevents those outcomes from happening, etc.? So I don't think we should automatically assume that higher outlays mean higher outcomes. If that is the case, then in several areas where outlays have gone up a lot, what are the commensurate outcomes over the last 70 years or so? It is therefore, while I completely agree with you on the importance of improving learning outcomes, which have taken a hit, especially post-COVID, I don't agree with you that higher outlays are necessarily the answer in terms of the necessary outcome that we are seeking.
Any questions from the audience, or I mean, I have a few questions of my own which I can go on. Yes, please. Please identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Sanjeev Vaste, I'm an investment banker. About the capital gains tax, yeah, the long-term rate has gone up from 10 to 12.5. But somehow the figure gives the feeling that this is not the milestone. This might be enhanced. So can we have some comfort that this will be a long-term rate for long-term listed assets for a reasonable period of time from tax certainty point of view and from institutional investor point of view? And also regarding 12.5 versus 20, was there a thinking that perhaps you could have both the rates going for some time and SECI could opt for whatever rate is beneficial, 20% after indexation or 12.5 without indexation?
No, I can't comment on your second suggestion. I'm sure many people have given some ideas on how this could be handled. Again, I think on your question whether can we take this as sort of a medium term or a long term number, this 12.5%, or is this just a milestone or whatever? Again, I think the finance secretary had clarified it quite a bit in his interaction with the media post budget, and he had pointed categorically that this is not being seen as a milestone, but this is the number.
Anybody else from the, yes, Lokeshwari?
Sir, regarding the private capex that you spoke about, that you see signs of it reviving based on 3,000 companies, don't you think part of that capex in machinery and all is an ongoing maintenance that many of these larger companies, oil refineries and all, they have to keep making some kind of a capex. So could it be because of that? And we also see a lot of concentration in some industries like Reliance. Few of the bigger companies do most of these capex, and most other companies are not really doing that. So would you still say that the private capex is reviving, because you are saying it all the time? But, yeah.
No, I think fair points, but if I look at the sectoral distribution, it doesn't seem very concentrated. And as to whether how much of it is replacement of existing machinery, simply, as you said, repairs and maintenance, or how much of it is new investment, because capacity utilization rates are running at still levels where they warrant a replacement. So I don't have that kind of granularity to be able to say X percentage is only maintenance and repairs and renewals rather than new investment. But all I can say is, in terms of the sectoral spread, it is not concentrated. If anything, the number of sectors which are seeing a cautious or even slight decline in gross fixed capital formation seem to be fairly small in number compared to the sectors where I see some positive momentum in capex.
Anybody else from the audience? Yes, Amity?
Maybe we should ask Mr. Bal Subramaniam to express his thoughts on that question, since he is the mutual fund man.
I think Shannon's point is right. I think look at private capex, especially the last 2 years, have picked up in setting up the new projects coming from few large houses. With, for example, our own group has announced a project about few years back, about 15 crores paint capex, which is now up and running. Likewise, similar trend is coming from large houses. But unlike the past, where they don't make a big headline, newspaper headline saying $5 billion capex, $2 billion, $10 billion capex, they're all small capex happening. Second is various sectors. I think they relate to the power sector. There are many sectors which I call it the engineering and capex space very large. There are many companies in the engineering space, especially the transformer companies or meter making companies. They are not very large size, but number of companies are actually getting into the space actually is rising. But they don't appear anywhere as part of the private capex in the headline, but there are the breadth and width of the spreading. I think that seems to be the one which is coming from the private sector capex.
Yeah, Amity? Sorry.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thank you very much for a very nice speech you have given. I'm from the steel industry. My name is V.R. Sharma. I'm the Vice Chairman of Jindal Advisory Board. 2 points. One, we have to see how to create more and more machine building facilities in the country. Today it is lacking. Government of China came with an order in 1990 that any machine, any equipment supplier or technology supplier coming to the country, they must build at least 60% of the machines in China. So which is not the case today in India. So we do not have the research institutes, we do not have the engineering institutes, we do not have the right tool rooms in the machine shops to manufacture the capital goods. So this is one area which is lacking very, very seriously. The another is, I feel personally, the growth of even 5.5% this fiscal year will be much better than we are expecting the 6.5. I wish that it should be 6.5, but 5.5 will be a reasonable growth looking to the world is melting. China is already melted away. Today I'll just tell you, China, they produce about 1 billion ton steel and they are now in a deep trouble. They have brought down the prices in last one and a half month by $100 per ton. I mean, they are making losses. How the rebate is being given by government of China, how they are maintaining it, it is beyond imagination. So a 5.5% growth if India achieves in terms of the manufacturing sector or overall, that will be much better. So this is what my view is. The another area is the capex. We all, the private sector industry, we must be very careful and very pragmatic, the right word you used, that whether to invest more or not, because the demand is not going to increase from the world region, because we in steel, metal, aluminum, cement industry, basically we are rated as the high CO2 generator in the world. So when it comes to the carbon dioxide, then more and more penalties or more and more the taxes through the CBAM or some other forms, they will be imposed on the exports. So I'm expecting that the exports will be very less out of India. So we have to see that how to make the balance of payments in terms of the forex. So the steel industry today in a deep trouble. So my suggestion to Government of India and to the policymakers is following: one, we should have a limited capex.
Sir,
and
could
we
you
should not-
please keep it short and ask your
Yeah,
question?
yes, please. We should have a limited capex, which can take away us, which can take us to a right level of growth. And number two, we should focus more and more on equipment and machine building. Third, last point, for the green energy, I think Government of India now should think for the micro nuclear power plants. When we speak to micro nuclear power plants, they are about 20 megawatt to 50 megawatt, because the sun does not shine everywhere in the country to have the solar power plants, and so is the wind. So these are my suggestions. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry, I've taken a longer time. Okay.
Thank you for your observations. Since there are no questions per se, I take your observations at face value. I just wanted to reassure the audience on the last point that you made. The budget does talk about quite a bit of emphasis on modular nuclear reactors, etc. And again, for the benefit of the audience, there is a report of the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to Government of India released about 2 months ago, and that report gives the kind of energy mix and alternatives that the country has to follow to be able to get to net zero by 2070, and that has a prominent place for nuclear energy as well.
Yeah. Amity, yeah.
Yeah, hi sir, I'm Amity Sen. I work for the Hindu Business Line. So I have a pop question to ask you. So you said that there are things that in the economic survey that media latched on to. So one such thing is what it says about FDI from China, on how it could be beneficial for India in terms of increasing its export capacity. But the government does not seem too keen to do that. So we have Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal saying that there is no thought on reviewing the FDI restrictions on China. So I just wanted to know that do you see that is there a point where these two view processes could meet?
No, both are legitimate. What we did was to throw up an issue there, and it is for the government of the day to consider all angles, security, economic and other considerations, to make a call as to whether it's the right thing to do, whether it's the right thing to do at the right time, or should it be done later. All that is up to the government, because the economic survey's purpose was to throw up an idea, given the fact that we have imports which are now increasing even after 2020. When Galwan happened, and so for example, if somebody had told me in May or June 2020 that 4 years down the road I would be writing something like this, I would have taken a bet that it will never happen. It would never happen. But here I am 4 years later writing about the possibility that should we consider this. That was the whole purpose. We didn't say this is the route to go, but should we consider this? Because our dependence on a country which can turn the tap off at any point in time is running high and getting higher and higher. So is that the right way, or should it be balanced by having them manufacture here with conditions attached in terms of joint venture requirements, technology transfer requirements, etc., such that you give them a stake in what is happening here, and you also create an opportunity for them to, our people to learn the know-how, etc., so that at least 5 years, 10 years down the road, we can remove this dependence. So that is the balance. Therefore, which sectors to choose, what conditions to attach, when to do this, those are subject to multiple considerations. So our aim was to put the idea up for public discussion and contemplation. Whether it happens now or tomorrow or 5 years later, that depends on multiple factors.
Anyone else? Yeah, the gentleman in the middle.
Good evening. Good evening, sir. My name is Ravikant Tiwari, a student at Aryabhat College. Being a student, we are witnessing the budget seriously for first time. But I'm sure you have a long and rich experience in this. My question is that, have you felt any difference in previous budget announcement and executions? And what kind of, if yes, what kind of execution we may expect from this budget?
No, I think every budget announcements made has, in fact, there are outcome documents also attached in the overall list of documents that are part of the budget documents. You can take a look at it, how the previous announcements have been implemented and in what time frame. For example, most prominent example is with respect to the public investments in the last several years, when the private sector was not able to invest because of balance sheet problems and banks were not willing to lend. The government of the day decided to increase its public investment, and every year the public investment outlay went up, and it was actually implemented in the amount, in the length of roadways constructed, power generation capacity created, metro lines built. All these are all examples of where government's thrust on public investment announced through the last 6-7 years of budgets having been actually implemented. And secondly, the other area where the government has created a clear concordance between commitment and deliveries with respect to the fiscal deficit. The government, when it had to increase the fiscal deficit to 9.2% due to COVID, due to security expenses in 2020-21, it did say that by 25-26 we will bring it down to 4.5% or lower. And that is the commitment that you are seeing is being fulfilled by bringing it down to 4.9% in 24-25, and naturally a target of 4.5% or slightly lower than that is well within reach. These are the two prominent examples I can give where I think government's commitment enunciated in the budget is actually being delivered.
Sir, my name is Jigish. I am with the Hindu. This is about the dip in agricultural sector growth. It's from 4.7, it has come to 1.4%. And the survey reasons that it could be because of the decrease in food production due to El Nino. But the production, on the other hand, has just decreased about 1 million ton. So what could be the real reason behind this huge dip in agricultural growth? Is there a severe realization crisis? Is there a distress among farmers? What is your view on this?
Farmer distress probably is not the particular reason, although it could be a factor in some cases, but it's not the reason behind the growth rate slowing down, because you have a high base, etc. And even a small dip in production, depending on the realization, because you are measuring it in value terms, that also contributes. And as I said, from a long-term perspective, the survey talks about the necessity for land consolidation, for allowing farmers to be able to respond to price signals, and also investment in net irrigation area, and also diversifying into other activities which have much greater value addition outside of traditional grains, etc. So these are all the multiple medium-term ways in which we can actually make agriculture also an engine of growth.
Yeah, I think we'll round up here with just one last question from me. Sir, a sort of theme that I've seen you enunciating it occasionally. Also, it factors into your calculation of growth. Is the global situation. One is the various conflicts that are flaring up, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, etc. But also the increasing sort of protectionism and nationalism that's going on. So, do you see in the coming years or decades, do you see this deglobalization escalating, or the point that you highlighted about India not following either communism or socialism or capitalism, but a kind of prudence or pragmatism, given the way we have progressed through these geopolitical crises and the policy direction that is followed, how do you foresee India shaping its policy?
Well, that's a very layered question, and I think the gentleman who spoke about the steel industry also spoke about the global export demand being very weak, and he was talking from his industry perspective. Even a 5.5% growth would be an extremely creditable achievement. That's what he was talking from his perspective. But I think he was in a way right in echoing the fact that if export markets constitute a good, if they contribute to economic growth in a given year, I would take it as a good bonus outcome. but I wouldn't make it my base case in the current scenario where the world is heading. From the point of view of political alignments, because even capital flows and trade flows are becoming based on the blocks that you belong to, etc. And developed countries are following active industrial policies, and carbon border adjustment taxes are the second aspect that we will be dealing with. Right now it's being piloted in Europe. From 26 becomes a reality. UK is talking about it, and the US administration, if it happens to be another democratic administration, they will also be pursuing similar carbon border adjustment taxes. So in this scenario, I think therefore exports will become much more challenging and difficult. We have to keep at it, no questions about that. As I always say, we have to keep doing what we have to do. Doesn't mean that we give up on it, but we should be also realistic about the outcomes. And that is why I think the low-hanging fruits of domestic growth need to be pursued much more vigorously in terms of efforts. And in that regard, I would still say the best bet for unleashing domestic economic energies, which also will benefit exports whenever the opportunity opens up. Because other countries have one major lacuna which India doesn't have. Today's exporting powerhouses like Vietnam, Bangladesh, Mexico will eventually run into capacity constraints more quickly than India. So at that time, we should be ready to cash in on the market share opportunities which we will gain. And for that, we have to create capacities and we have to create capabilities. And that is where I think deregulation, de-licensing, de-compliance, de-inspection, these are all the ways in which the heavy hand of the government, which still has a big role to play in leashing economic activity at all levels of the government, if that can be lifted, that is the best way in which we can unleash our energies, both with respect to domestic drivers of growth and external drivers of growth whenever the opportunity arises.
I think with that, we will end the question answer session. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us.
Everyone, what an interesting Q&A session that was. A round of applause for that. May I now request Purnima Joshi ma'am to felicitate Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran sir. So once again, many thanks, gratitude for your valuable time and insights that you have shared with us today. And we are truly, sir, grateful to you. Everyone, a round of applause. Many thanks, gratitude. Dr. V. Anantha Nageswaran sir, Chief Economic Advisor of India. Sir, thank you very much. Thank you, Purnima ma'am. Many thanks. Thank you. Thank you, sir. With this, we now have a very interesting panel discussion on post-budget analysis. Requesting everyone to be there with us. A very interesting discussion that's on post-budget analysis as a part of the Hindu Businessline Decoding the Budget 2024. Thank you, sir, once again. Moving ahead with the agenda, that's the panel discussion now on post-budget analysis. And for that, may I now invite on the moderator for the session, Lokeshwari Madam, Data Editor of Businessline. Greetings, good evening, and a round of applause to welcome our moderator. And now with our moderator, Lokeshwari Madam, on stage, I'll take her consent and invite on our very distinguished, eminent panelists. Ma'am, I'm inviting on the panelists for the session. Thank you. Moving ahead, we are delighted to welcome, it's our pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists, Professor Ashok Gulati sir, Infosys Chair, Professor for Agriculture at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations, an eminent agricultural economist, former chairman of CACEP, currently serving on the Central Board of Directors of Reserve Bank of India, NABARD, amongst others. With a round of applause, let's welcome Ashok Gulati sir. Sir, greetings, good evening, welcome sir. We welcome Mr. A. Balasubramanian sir, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of Aditya Birla Sun Life AMC Limited, with over more than 2 decades of experience in the mutual fund industry. He has excelled as a portfolio manager in both fixed income and equity. A round of applause to welcome Mr. Balasubramanian. Sir, greetings, warm welcome. we welcome Madam Jyoti Vik, seasoned business economist and industry leader with nearly 3 decades of experience in Indian Industry Association. Madam Jyoti Vik, Director General FICCI. Ma'am, greetings, good evening, welcome. We welcome Mr. Devendra Kumar Pansar, Chief Economist and Head of Public Finance Ratings at Indian Ratings and Research Private Limited. Sir, greetings, warm welcome. And lastly, but surely not the least, we welcome Dr. Sitikanta Patnaik, Sir, Executive Director, earlier the Executive Director of the Reserve Bank of India, currently Chief Economist at NABARD. Sir, greetings and warm welcome, sir. And with that, once again, warm welcome to all our esteemed panelists. And I request our moderator, Lokeshwari Madam, to begin the deliberations for our panel discussion on post-budget analysis. Everyone, with a round of applause, let's welcome the moderator and our very esteemed panelists. Ma'am, please, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everybody. Last week, exactly a week ago, this time, we were all very busy looking at the budget, perusing its various aspects, looking at the packages for the employment, looking at the fiscal deficit number, and we're all really busy with all that. So, but now, a week later, all the fine print has been read and all the clarifications have been given mostly. So now is probably a good time for us to sit down with our very distinguished panel here and try to understand the various nuances of the budget. I'll not take too much time here and I'll just start the panel discussion right away. So to begin with the distinguished panelists, I'd like to start a warm-up round of questions. I'd like to ask all of you to tell me very briefly, any one budget proposal that you really liked very much, which you think that will help the long-term growth of India and help the country go towards that 2047 Viksit Bharat goal. So which budget proposal do you think will really matter in the long term? So can we start with Dr. Patnaik?
I think among all the budget proposals, given the very fact that we are dealing with the growth challenges that India may face going ahead, given our aspiration and also the potential to move up from the low middle income country to high middle income country and then the final target of 2047, I think the focus on R&D and productivity, that according to me will be the key. And when you allow me time, maybe I will elaborate.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Dr. Pant?
Thanks, Lokeshwari. I believe we talked a lot about the physical infrastructure. I think Purnima ma'am talked about it in brief. The problem which may face going forward, even if we develop the physical infrastructure, we have state-of-art machinery, we need skills. And the investment in human capital, a trained, educated labor force and a healthy labor force. There is a talk about skilling and all those. If gentlemen asked about how we can see the budget proposal going forward and what has happened in the last year's budget. So the skilling, you may not see the direct impact on any growth number for FY25. It is one thing. If we develop it properly, maybe 4 or 5 years down the line, you will see that.
Okay, point taken.
Thanks. Well, the best thing that I like about the budget is there is nothing major negative. It's a cool budget. I think macroeconomic stability and the frugality on that path coming to the normal is the best part of the budget.
Okay, thank you. Bala sir?
Yeah. I think I'll put it in different thing, that expectations versus actual outcome on the budget. Expectations were that it will be a socialistic budget. Given the fact that this is the coalition government got elected after 2 terms of single government running it. There is a shift in policy change. In fact, nothing came. The budget continued to keep a high focus on driving the momentum of the growth by keeping the allocation towards sectors that will make India dream to become the third largest economy real. So therefore, the allocations of resources were in line with the what has been the stated policy. Second is the social benefit schemes, whatever was being given to the respective states. There were more in the nature of making those states become more prosper, which is increasing the GDP growth of contribution coming from those states. This also something came as more linked to the productivity. And third is, despite all the odds being there, I think they could have chosen to spend more money at the same time at the cost of fiscal. Respecting fiscal and reducing the fiscal deficit by 20 basis points. Also, it's something is a very good message that they are giving to the world, global economy, or rather the world economy, which essentially means that India is getting prepared for a 2-notch upgrade on the rating side. I think now, I'm not even counting 1-notch upgrade. We are preparing for 2-notch upgrade. The way we are looking at the growth momentum, overall fiscal deficit direction, basis which I see the budget is quite growth-oriented budget.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. Yes, I think many things said, but for me, I think I'll just reiterate that the focus on employment and employability as well as self-employment is something which definitely stands out. I think in every aspect of budget that got covered. It could be details that in how that will pan out is something which we are yet to see. But I think that was one of the main focus areas to my mind. And I think a lot of support announced for MSMEs as well, which is again backbone. So when I say self-employment, employment, those are the aspects which they pan out where it can be really potentially good for the economy forward. And what I think Professor Gulati and Bala said about the fiscal deficit, I think they've been really prudent on that and not really the way it was expected that will be a populist budget. I think they have really refrained from doing that. Thank you very much. So now let's move on to the budget numbers per se. I'll start with Dr. Pant, who look at the macro numbers. Yeah, so like it was said in the earlier by the CA also, the number that everyone focuses on is the fiscal deficit, whether it's 5.1 or 4.9 or 4.5 and so on and so forth. But this year they're telling us to move away, stop obsessing over fiscal deficit number and start looking at the debt to GDP number, debt to GDP ratio. So why is this shift happening? So what do you think is the idea behind this shift? And our combined government debt to GDP is about 83%, if I'm not wrong. So are we reaching an alarming level, do you think? What's your take on that?
Look, whether they say whether we should not look at the fiscal deficit, look, in entire FRBM, when the FRBM was revised, targets were fixed, suddenly the revenue deficit target has gone in the way. Earlier we were like, you have a revenue deficit, bring it down to 0, or if you could have the surplus and limit your fiscal deficit to 3%. The whole idea was, suppose you have 1% of GSDP at state level or 1% of GDP at national level as the revenue surplus. So basically what you are doing, you are collecting more taxes, spending less, you borrow 3% more and finance your capex. So your capex is 4%. This is one situation of 3% fiscal deficit. Another situation of fiscal deficit is 2% revenue deficit, 3% fiscal deficit, capex is just 1%. Fast forward it continuously for 10 years. Continuously for 10 years and see what will be the difference. Now, again, there are different states. When we talk about India, we should look at the heterogeneity of the economy. Right? You have advanced states in terms of industrialization. You have advanced states like Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Himachal, where the social development is at par with the East Asian economies or some of the developed world. But on the other hand, you have Professor Ashish Bose's term Bimaru states, right? Or as well combined Bihar, UP, Rajasthan. So you have to focus, but at the end result, when we look at any fiscal issues, we look at any economy or state, ultimately it boils down to the debt sustainability. You borrow, you add to the debt. You add to the debt, next year your interest payments are going to go up. Your interest payment going to go up, you have the pressure on fiscal deficit, you will borrow more, and this is what nothing but all the debt trap. For debt sustainability, just look at two numbers from the budget, right? One number is what is the primary deficit, which is, had there been no debt, no interest payment from fiscal deficit, knock off your interest payment. That is the primary deficit number given the last item at the budget at a glance. You have revenue deficit, you have effective revenue deficit, you have fiscal deficit at the end, there's the primary deficit. Unfortunately, none of us paid any attention to that. Primary deficit. And then the second number you look at, what is the nominal growth of the GDP? Difference between nominal GDP growth and interest rate. Now the interest rate, because we have a debt stock, don't look at the borrowing cost of that day. Because right now we are talking about 6.9. No. We have the past debt which was borrowed even at 10% or 11%. You have multilateral debt where we are servicing at 75 basis point over the LIBOR or 6 months, 3 months, 1 year LIBOR. Simply look at how much the interest payment of this fiscal, because government hardly borrow short term. There are treasury bills and other things, but they're not a big amount. That interest payment number, you take it, look at the closing stock of the debt of the previous year, you will get interest rate. Now three numbers are playing here. One is your primary deficit. Second is your difference between nominal growth of the GDP and the average interest rate on debt. Average interest rate on debt, even as on today, works out be somewhere around close to 8 odd percent, right? Even the last year, nominal GDP growth was 9.6%. This year, we are talking about 10.5, which is gross underestimation. Gross underestimation, I'm saying. And so, if your primary account has surplus, this has the tendency to reduce your debt to GDP ratio. If your nominal GDP growth and the interest rate on that number is positive, that will give you downward bias on the interest rate. Just go back to 2003 to 2008 era and please take out politics out of it, right? That was the time when your fiscal deficit gone down, your primary deficit gone down, your nominal GDP growth was high, your interest rate was low. You see how the debt to GDP has fallen, right? Ultimately, whether it is your 8% growth, 7% growth, will boil down to how much you are borrowing and what is the repaying capacity. There are many investment bankers, corporate analysts, and all those everybody look at in the classroom, finance, business schools taught what is the interest cover, right? What is your debt service coverage ratio? When you look at the economy, you have to look at that way. Yes, the number may not sound very good, 80%, but as your economy will continue to grow and your interest rates continue to fall, yes, there is a pressure, permanent pressure on the budget of high interest payment, but that sustainability as on today, it's a problem, but it is not moving towards unsustainable debt. But yes, if our growth slows down further, we come down to 5.5% kind of real and 2 or 3% kind of GDP deflator growth, we'll have a nominal growth number of somewhere around 7%. Interest rate on that is somewhere around 8%. That will be disaster.
Okay, sir. I'll turn to the most important package announced. We talked about the employment and skilling. Ms. Vij, I'd like your views on this because there are about 5 schemes that they announced with a 2 lakh crore package to be spent over 5 years. So what do you think that giving 15,000 to fresh employees in a year, or making the EPFO payment on behalf of the employer. Do you think all these will really make industries take on fresh employees? Do you think these schemes will work? What's your view on that?
Yeah, thank you. So in a smaller way, this has been experimented in the past as well, and we've had some positive feedback from the companies in the manufacturing space, as those schemes have really helped in adding more. I think we had also seen similar things coming during the COVID time as well. So there was offtake. Obviously, the time will tell as to how these pan out. But I think the most important point is, and the narrative that I'm seeing in the government in last couple of months that I've had interactions, is that there is a lot of focus now going on employability. So it's not that employment is not required, there are not jobs in these companies. If you are able to create employability, hardcore industry into the whole skill development program, be able to create the kind of people, plus add, the kind of benefits that have been added in the budget, I think we then get a very holistic package. There seems to be a far more focus on skilling now and involving industry into the skilling programs. So this discussion has come from the people on the government side, and there's so much outreach from both sides actually to collaborate with each other to have more practical programs and be able to get the kind of employable resources that we can create. Secondly, I think on the internship program, the CSR bit, things are still evolving, but that's a smart way of using the CSR program by using it for internship, apprenticeship, whatever the nomenclature is. And when we talk of training, there are these skilled youth which are taken on board, but still there is some kind of bridge program or some plugging of the skill gap which the company needs to do, which can go towards training and buying equipments, etc. So at the face of it, it looks like this is going to really work, but I think most important would be how fast are able to create that employable youth and really work collaboratively in this space. One of the examples is that we are working on, very focusedly working on Make in India being one of the priority sectors that we have identified, and so is the women-led development. And we have taken curriculums to the skill ministry. We have sat together to tell them this is what industry wants, this is what you have. So we have to walk a few miles, both sides have to walk a few miles to, create a curriculum which actually creates that employability. So it has to be a very holistic one, and we do foresee that kind of environment emerging. Once it happens, the schemes will most definitely help in offtake as well. So that is an added benefit.
Actually, the CEA did say there's a lot of convergence between the economic survey and the budget. And there he spoke about the AI actually leading to short-term loss of jobs. And is there a fear that because of the increased automation and AI and all, the employment opportunity will go down? Is that why the government is incentivizing? Is the government and the budget and the economic survey working in tandem to kind of address this challenge?
So the fear is there obviously, but AI will create other kind of jobs. When we moved into the computerization, I remember there was so much fear of losing the jobs. We had strikes all over the public sector units. We all know that. So I think it's a similar unknown game which is emerging. But what you again need to know is the future of skills. I think that space is what we need to understand and start training our youths accordingly. I think that is it's more of in the realm of fear at the moment. We really don't know, and I think that's where the skill gap analysis is very important, perhaps sector by sector. One of the things we at FICCI are also trying to kind of add to the government's efforts towards it, but that's what at least we feel at the moment. The fear is there, but fear is unknown, and we probably need to decode it.
Okay. Dr. Gulati, I'll come to you. So we do have to control the expenditure because to keep the fiscal consolidation going. But then we see that the subsidies, especially the food and the fertilizer subsidies, took about 3.69 lakh crore. about 7% of the total budget itself, and you have very strong views on how we can rationalize it, which is very important, I think, going ahead, because fuel subsidies have come down, but these two continue to just stay there. So please do share your views on that.
Okay, let me put some facts on the table before attacking this question of subsidies. Manufacturing, the industry, a revolution cannot take place in this country and has not taken place in this country so far because the demand from the masses is missing. It is only the top 15-20% of people who have the purchasing power, and therefore how many cars they can buy and how many televisions they can buy. Unless we increase the income of the masses in the rural areas, this question of growth of manufacturing 1 year at 8% and then again down and then again will continue. We have to learn something from China. They started off reforms with agriculture and not trade policy and the industrializing, in delicensing and all. The reason why I am saying this is, those who are not aware, the monthly per capita expenditure in rural areas per capita is only 3,773. 3,773. Multiply that by the average family size of about 4.5, it is a little less than 17,000 rupees. This is 22-23, the largest ever household consumption survey. You can adjust for inflation here and there and whatever meager savings, if at all they have. Broadly, to remember, average household in the rural areas, income is only less than 20,000 rupees a month, full household. Okay? With that, how many goods they can buy for industrial, to give a boost to the industrialization of this country. So one thing is very clear, that unless we double the incomes in rural areas, this manufacturing revolution, as per my understanding and whatever I have read about China and India, I did a book called The Dragon and the Elephant. I have learned that unless masses gain, the growth process will not be on a sustainable basis. Now, how do we increase the income? That's where your question comes. One way is give them subsidies, more and more free food to 800 million people. Is that the right way? On one side you are saying poverty has come down by whatever measure, it's about 10-11%, whether you go by multi-dimensional or by the income poverty of the World Bank, it's about 11%, 10%. Okay, you want to give food free to those? Fine, I have no problem. Why do you give free food to 800 million people? एक चींटी ने भी अपना कमाना होता है ना, तो वो भी काम करती है खाना खाने के लिए. चींटी इंसान है, दिमाग है, हाथ है. So to me this is nothing else but politics. Okay, and that is draining away. There is the biggest subsidy in the budget, 2.05 lakh crore out of 48 lakh crore budget, 2.05, and I bet it's going to be not less than 2.25 lakh crore. Because on what basis they have reduced? Last year it was 2.12 lakh crores. MSP you have increased and your still coverage is the same. So the subsidy will come down or go up. I don't know if they have something to rationalize it. Why are we giving free rice to a rice producer in the country? And then he gives you back. So there is a lot of round tripping going on in the country. And that's why FCI today is having 3.5 times the buffer stock than what the norm is. The stocks with it is huge inefficiency. If Tata or any industrialist has stocks of cars 3.5 times than what they need, what will happen? लेकिन मेरा देश महान है. FCI के पास जितना stock होगा उतना अच्छा लगता है. It is huge inefficiency in the operations of this. There was a very good question, and I'll come down to fertilizer in a minute if you need it. There was a question from Hindu that production has not declined, but how come the growth has declined? Look at that, the realization question. In 13th of May 2022, we suddenly imposed export bans on wheat because Russia-Ukraine war, and we were fearing inflation. Despite that export ban, at that time inflation was about 9% in wheat. In fact, after the ban, inflation started increasing. And instead of wheat going out, atta started going out. People are smarter than the government. Then in August, they put a ban on atta. You can't export this. Still, inflation kept on increasing. It was 25% inflation in January 2023. Now they were fearing, my God, April the harvest will come. The prices in the open market were hovering around 2,700 rupees a quintal. The MSP was 2,185, something like that. And they said, we will not be able to procure anything. And the previous year, the procurement had dropped from 40 million tons to 18 million tons. So they were afraid there are no stocks. So what did they do? Whatever little stocks they had at that time, 3.5 million tons, within 1.5 months, they dumped in the market. It cost the government 29 rupees a kg. They dumped it at 22 rupees a kg. If it was some other government dumping in our country, we would have taken them to WTO. But when our FCI is doing, to control the prices, so the prices were brought down through this open market operations of FCI. You may be happy, inflation may start coming down, but farmers lost 40,000 crores. Wheat farmers lost 40,000 crores in this business. This is what happened. Then we imposed rice bans, then even onion ban, okay, all the bans, sugar ban, this ban. So this is what happens. So it's an implicit tax that you put on the farmer. I have sympathy with the policymaker because they have to balance the interest of the consumer as well as the producer. But if you analyze over a longer period of time, what is happening? This tax element through export bans, on stocking limits on traders, and so on and so forth, that break is much harder than the subsidies that you give to the farmer. And overall, Indian farmer is net taxed when you compare the two sides. There is a 300-page report we have done, 2 years, a team of 10 people. It's on the OECD website if anybody wants to do. But let me come down to fertilizer subsidy and the rationalization within 1 minute. Fertilizer subsidy is 1.64 lakh crores in the budget. Basic thing is urea. And urea is highly subsidized for the last 12-13 years. The prices have remained constant. There is no other country in the world where urea is as cheap as in India. So farmers should be happy on that front. And that gives them the legitimacy to the government to impose all these controls. We are giving you so much subsidy. But the plant is consuming only 35% of the urea that is being applied through granular urea. Rest is going in the environment as nitrous oxide, which is 273 times the carbon dioxide. Or it is leaching into water table, and nitrate content in the water table, water is becoming non-potable. So you have massive inefficiency in the use of urea, right? And then massive inefficiency in food subsidy. Now, how do you rationalize it? It's very simple. You want to help the consumer, give directly food coupons to them and list these 20 commodities they can buy. Why only rice and wheat? To a rice producer you are giving rice. Let them buy pulses, let them buy oilseeds, let them buy milk or anda or anything else. So more nutrition. You can declare out of 5,50,000 fair price shops, at least 10% of them, 50,000 fair price shops as the nutrition hubs where these coupons can be used. You can ask people, do you want food coupons with 20 commodities thing, or you want only rice and wheat, right? So you will save a lot on that, and you can give a better nutrition to the people. So that is the way to go forward. Same thing on fertilizer. On one side we are saying natural farming. How much is the allocation of natural farming? 500 crores. And then you give 1,64,000 crores of chemical fertilizer subsidy. और chemical लगाओ और इतना सस्ता लगाओ कि पूरा डैमेज करो soil को भी, water को भी, air को भी. Again you give them digital coupons. They should be allowed to buy soluble fertilizers which are through the fertigation route in the drip irrigation. The nutrient use efficiency goes up from 35% to 90% and no greenhouse gas emissions. But soluble fertilizers are not subsidized. So you give digital coupons to the farmers. This is the value, this is what we have distributed. Now you want to go for soluble fertilizer, granular urea, or you want to go for biofertilizers or manure. It's your choice. So you empower the people. And today you say, oh, we are in the forefront of the world of digital technologies. Why don't you use these to all the leakages? 25% of fertilizer never goes to agriculture. It goes to plywood industry, it goes to glass industry, it goes to neighboring countries. Because it is so cheap, so there are leakages. So you will plug all these leakages. Same thing, in fact, we have worked out even in food. There is a leakage of 25 to 30%, despite all these POS machines that we have. You know? So we'll work out that. So there is a strong case. These are two big ticket items. 2.05 lakh crore plus 1.64 lakh crores. That's a huge amount of money, and my feeling is if you do it right, minimum 25%, 70,000 crores can easily be saved. 70,000 crores. Vajpayee formula was Antodaya will get free, but BPL people will have to pay 50% of the MSP, and APL, above poverty line, will have to pay at least 90% of the MSP. So you bring back that formula, you will save thousands and thousands of crores. Put that into agriculture R&D and irrigation, your productivity will jump up, and that is the real solution to control inflation, not these export controls and stocking limits and all that. We need to raise productivity and incomes of the farmers. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, sir. So from farming to, we'll come to the stock market and indexation and all, Bala sir. So there's been a lot of talk about this long-term capital gains tax and short-term capital gain tax going up. So there were two main reasons that they said why they did this. One was simplification and rationalization, and the other was to curb speculation. That was the markets going up and up, like CA said, and causing some risk. So do you think both these objectives have been achieved? Simplification and curbing speculation through this?
Yeah, I think last 2-3 years FM has been mentioning about the whole capital gain tax structures have to be aligned in a manner you are able to remember what is the short-term capital gain tax meaning is and what is the long-term capital gain meaning is. That's something they've done it through defining one year versus 2 year, and second is 12.5 now they made it uniform across listed securities, including real estate beyond 2 years. So that's something they are living up to the expectations. Second is from the equity capital market point of view, they have done wonders. Equity capital market in India has been one of the most performing market, not only just emerging market, as Anant Nageshwaran gave a number. India has been the great wealth creator for the investors in the market, which is nothing but reflection of economic growth. And we as a economy emerging as a powerful economy in the world, that's getting reflected on both the domestic savings coming into the market as well as the company's earnings. I think you also quoted the numbers, which is the company earnings have gone up by almost 4 or 5 times in the last 4 years. That's also reflected in the market. Therefore, this is the wealth effect which has now come in. For the 2.5% increase, it is over a period of, if you take a 5-year holding period or 10-year holding period, as a percentage of increase in tax on a per annum basis, I think very insignificant. Therefore, the ability to pay the 2.5% extra is far higher today. Therefore, is going to be paid out of the income that it generates. That's one. Second is, there is a significant participation coming from retail investors in the market, and some of them are in the form of speculative in nature, some of them are in the form of short-term in nature, very few of them are long-term in nature. So by introducing short-term capital gain tax, or by increasing by 5%, making it straight away from 15% to 5%, definitely will make people to think, if I'm buying for 9 months, can I hold it for another, say, 3 months to get the long-term capital gain at 12.5%? It will actually shift your goalpost from the way you think in terms of trading. So therefore, they bring in a cult that to start looking at, make people start looking at more than 1 year holding period. To the extent that 5% will is good for the government, one side, is also good for the short-term investors to think long-term. Second, on the derivatives market. But in any market, you need to have a speculation for you to have a vibrant capital market. Of course, India, I think we have seen a significant participation coming in the F&O market, which is prevalent in even in US also. This similar behavior prevails. But one way to actually introduce the transaction tax, which is security transaction tax, also make people think actually that whether you want to trade more and pay the security transaction tax, or you avail the long-term capital tax, anyway I'm giving you a benefit for you to hold for long-term. So they're also building a cultural shift in terms of trading pattern. So while it could be argued whether it is right or wrong, but ability to absorb such increase in taxes today is far higher. Therefore, timing-wise and introducing this the new taxes, increasing tax on both short-term, long-term, and increasing the F&O transactions, all of them are actually more intended towards changing the behavior of investors. Think long-term. If you are long-term investors, you will actually make more money. If you are short-term investors, you may make money, but you end up paying some cost as well. So that I think the two messages are differently coming in this.
But do you think it will create some, will your mutual fund strategies being impacted due to this tax changes, the way you invest and all that?
No, from mutual fund point of view, nothing changes. Everything remains the same. Because mutual fund in general, the churn out ratios, and any fund manager, if you look at actively managed funds, is only about 0.4, 0.5 times of your portfolio value. So mutual fund managers do not churn. Only the individual investors, the moment they get a profit, the tendency to book profit in a short term is also high. If you are long-term investors, again, tendency to book profit is also high. Whereas in the mutual fund players, I think we invariably end up holding for 10-year or 15-year period. Therefore, from mutual fund money manager behavior point of view, nothing changes. But there is one, of course, which is of course one of my grievance, probably I would call it. I think enough has been done for the development of the equity capital market. I think we are in a sweet spot of probably would have ever dreamt in our dream, ever would have dreamt in the past that India would have such a vibrant equity capital market. Today, companies are able to raise equity capital much more than what they would have done about, say, a few years back. The money is available for risky capital, money is available. The same breadth and width, which also focus on developing debt capital market. I think for any companies, when you are building the business, the two sources of financing, one is equity capital raising is a must. Equal amount of effort should also be made for bringing debt capital market, so that debt resource of financing also is made available. So this budget, we were expecting some benefits could be given for development of the debt capital market, and by incentivizing through the mutual fund investors. That's something that didn't come, and therefore the indexation benefit has also been taken away, which is what we have also made an appeal that some bit of attention should be paid for the development of the debt capital market, where the mutual fund can play very large role, as they have done in the case of equity. Today, Then Indian equity capital market is very sound, solid, and sound enough to give tough time for overseas investors. We have seen almost overseas investors every month withdrawing money from India, whereas domestic investors have been the bigger savior of the stability in the Indian equity capital market through the mutual funds. And assets have gone almost about 8 lakh crore plus. A similar experience should be created as per the bond market concern as well, which I think my view mutual fund play a very large role in that space.
Dr. Patnaik, the farmers got the first mention in the budget, but I'm coming to you later. But then, yeah, I'd like to hear from you about the agri-budget, all the salient features there, because with 45% of the employment and 18% of GVA, I think that's a sector we just cannot ignore. So what has been done, in your view, in the budget for the farmers?
According to me, the agri-budget can be seen in terms of 4 strategic issues: productivity, then sustainability, self-sufficiency or resilience, and diversification. The issue is why these 4 strategic issues are so important to India today and also going ahead, and what the budget has done to make progress on each of these. Coming to productivity, I would refer to one report which was released, which is known as the World Agricultural Productivity Report. It has given the decade-wise world agricultural GVA growth and the sources of growth. Maybe 5-6 decades back, much of the growth used to come from inputs, input intensity. But in last 3 decades, 60% of growth is coming from productivity. I'm talking about world. That will include, of course, India. So if India's per capita income is going to increase by 8 times, GDP by 9 times, and population will peak at 1.65 billion, as I think last week was specified by Niti Aayog. So we have to meet that challenge. For that, we have to prepare ourselves. So what the budget has proposed in that sense is that to review the research setup that we have in the system. But I would not see only the research setup. To think about productivity in agriculture, we have to take 3 measures together. One is a review of the research setup. Second one is the digital infrastructure for agriculture, because you will have now the digital footprints of farmers and also information about their land records. It will happen. And the third thing is that a new cooperation policy also will be announced. So why I am saying that from India's standpoint, these 3 will be the path to innovation-led enhancement in productivity, because we generally have models where government, private sector, and research centers of the universities, they interact. Okay, so it is the government funds research, then research entities generate new ideas, and through the private sector, that essentially reaches the economy, which is known as the triple helix model. I think many would know here. But what is emerging now here globally, where the countries which have demonstrated increase in GVA through productivity growth, that in case of agriculture, unlike manufacturing, we require a 4th helix. So it is a quadruple helix model, under which it is the people who matter, like the farmers, what they will accept and what will work in different areas. That is very important. So in that setup, we have APOs, farmer producer organizations, we have self-help groups, but I think the only institutional setup that we have, particularly once we have now cooperatives in almost every panchayat, then you need some institutional entity which will deliver whatever new innovation has to happen. It is not that funding is to be provided now, because in the National Research Foundation, they have allocated 2,000 crore. Last year also they had allocated. And the objective behind this allocation is that they will actually create that structure. Because once you know the structure, who is going to innovate, who is going to do the transmission and dissemination, and then finally how the government is going to get benefit, because when the growth happens, how much of it will come back as tax revenue. That structure has to be put in place. So in that sense, I think the three announcements that they have made together, the new cooperation policy, the digital infrastructure for agriculture, and also a review and maybe reshape of the research setup for agriculture, that I think is very important. The second one, coming to sustainability, as Professor Gulati talked about natural farming, I think there are two views here. One view is basically they will refer to Sri Lanka, that it failed there. But in Sri Lanka, it failed because it was a balance of payment crisis. They wanted to reduce their import of fertilizers. They switched to natural farming. But if you take the example of China, in 2015, they had set a target that over the next 5 years, our net increment in fertilizer use will be 0. And that actually achieved it in 2020-21. So what I'm saying here is that given the 13 crore farmer setup we have, it is a beginning with basically a target for 1 crore farmer over 2 years. And there is a very good research report which was released last year. It covers most of the districts of Andhra Pradesh. It has given fine insights on how exactly one should be approaching natural farming. It has taken tribal belt, semi-arid zone, and also the input intensive Godavari basin. So what it finds is that where input intensity is already high, irrigation facilities are already there, natural farming may not deliver much. That means your input cost may not go down substantially and farmers' income may not increase. But there are pockets where actually your input cost may go down and your income may increase. So in that context, one has to be very careful and calibrated. And what I'm saying is that if out of 13 crore farmers, we can over the next 5 years move at least 3 to 4 crore farmers to natural farming, maybe India can also set a target like China that after 5 years, our net zero increment in fertilizer will be 0. It has to be done because at some point carbon emission from agriculture will also become an issue. Because currently everybody is focusing on industry, maybe transportation, automobiles, but after 5 years, 6 years, certainly the focus also will come on carbon emissions from agriculture. So that's why it's better to start the preparation today. And we have a path, and Sikkim also has demonstrated that by abandoning the path of infrastructure, path of fertilizer, very gradually, they have now natural farming. There are issues with that, but what I'm saying, it is doable. Third one is obviously diversification. I think in the third paragraph of the budget speech of the Honorable Finance Minister, she has mentioned about core inflation dropping to 3.1 and the need for more supply management. And in that context, the proposal is to have more vegetables clusters and also closer to consumption centers. And the mechanism possibly what is there, which is already working, is farmer producer organizations. Maybe the farmer producer organizations have to be focused more on vegetables. It has to be more targeted. And if it is not done, the challenge of core inflation and food inflation diverging possibly will persist. But vegetable is an area where more production and more storage is possible. And the very fact that now the largest warehouse capacity will be added in the cooperative sector, and also NABARD is having a role there. So that also hopefully will help in stabilizing food prices, particularly from the vegetable side. That is conducive enough for achieving price stability, consistent with the high growth target they have. And the fourth one, I think in terms of self-sufficiency, pulses and edible oil is not new. But the most important thing they have mentioned there is about shrimps and starting nucleus breeding center, that is broodstocks, because we are heavily import dependent on that. Why that is an important issue? Because in maybe 3 years back, Ecuador has taken over India as the largest exporter of shrimps. And since that time, actually our export levels have stagnated at around 710, 712 lakh tons, whereas Ecuador has gone to almost 1.3 billion tons. So what it shows is that what we achieved with case of milk, the success happened in the cooperative sector. And the challenge that we are facing in the same sector, the same challenge we faced in the 80s for the broiler chicken side. And it is the Venkies, they gave us the solution. It was same problem. And now if you see the website of Venkies, now they are exporting SPF eggs to countries like Indonesia, maybe even Switzerland and Saudi Arabia. So it may take 7 to 8 years to have the indigenous technology and indigenous nucleus plant. But I am saying that this is again the beginning, but in the right direction. This has huge export potential, particularly if you see the export markets of US and China. The demand is always there. It's a question of only meeting that demand. And domestic demand for shrimps also is growing. So in that sense, it is not only pulses and edible oil where the focus is clearly there. Even in case of shrimps, I think it is very much required. And NABARD, I think, as announced in the budget, will be a close partner in implementing this. NABARD has played an instrumental role when basically in many districts, these chicken broiler centers were opened across districts. I think there are studies from the Training Institute of NABARD that how exactly NABARD's involvement in this contributed to the success of this scheme. So I'm sure the same would happen in case of shrimps. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Dr. Gulati, you want to say something, I think? Add something here.
I think a very critical point that Siti has put on the table. One is productivity augmentation. If you have seen of the 9 areas Madam Finance Minister listed as her priority areas for action, the first one was productivity enhancement with climate resilience. Now that requires a lot of investment in R&D and extension work for farming practices which are climate smart agriculture and climate resilient seeds. You know, we worked on this issue that if you put 10 rupees in agriculture R&D, the return, marginal rate of return is 11 times more. So you will get 110 rupees worth of return in terms of agriculture output. Unfortunately, the agriculture R&D budget, ICR budget is about 10,000 crores, 9,995 or something. So 10,000 crores, which is only 0.7% increase from the previous revised budget. In real terms, if you account for inflation, it has gone down. So on one side you are saying productivity and climate resilience is needed, but you are not putting enough into this. You are putting 1,64,000 crores in fertilizer subsidy, where if you spend 100 rupees on fertilizer subsidy, you get a return of only 88 rupees. So less than what you are spending. This is the result in fertilizer subsidy because of the huge inefficient use of fertilizers. And these are recorded studies published. Actually, it was released by Arun Jaitley ji. That book is there on this. So we need to understand that. But second thing on which Siti perhaps did not touch as much, one is the production side, higher productivity and resilience. But the other is higher and good prices for the farmers. The whole debate for the farmers is price, price, price. Now, if you keep on dumping within your own country and try to suppress the prices, so productivity augmentation and then give the best access to markets. Farmer must have access to best markets. Now, what is the problem? In Delhi, I buy pineapple at 100 rupees a kg. Pineapple in Meghalaya, I was just 2 weeks back in farmer's field, and Meghalaya is selling at 11 rupees a kg. 11 rupees a kg versus 100 rupees a kg. because the value chains are so fragmented, the logistic costs are high, commissions are there are 5 persons in between. The way we built value chains for milk, where the farmer gets 75 to 80% of what the consumer pays. In case of vegetables, farmer typically gets 1/3 of what the consumer pays. Today, inflation, and good luck to RBI to control this, because it is all because of vegetables and pulses. So vegetable prices, your onion and potato are at 58% inflation rate. Tomato is at 26%. Market is selling tomatoes at 100 rupees a kg, and every housewife is upset on that. There was a scheme started on the lines of this milk thing called the TOP. Tomatoes, onion, potatoes, to build those supply chains. Where is that scheme gone? Buried under the ministerial, nobody is responsible. Why don't you create a separate board the way you created NDDB board and look out for a Korean and vegetables to fix this, so that farmers should get at least 2/3 of what the consumer is paying, and it can be done. We have done that in milk, why can't we do in milk, in vegetables? So it's a priority and perseverance of a policy that needs to be pursued, and things can be sorted out both for the consumer as well as the producer. Thank you.
How much time do we have? 10 minutes more. Okay, 10 minutes, that's all. No, I have so many more, that's why I'm just, I'm not done. Shall we? Should we open the floor for the audience, because 10 minutes more means we have to hear from them. No, he's saying I can continue for 10 more minutes and then go on. Okay. Yeah, so Dr. Pant, one question for you. Yeah, so the tax to GDP ratio is not so great, and we are seeing the buoyancy in income tax. Personal income tax is okay, but customs duty is projected to grow at about 2% in this BE, and excess duty at 5%. So is it like now we have to look at other levers to increase revenue, look at other non-tax revenue? I think others can also chip in, maybe Ms. Vidge or something. Like, is there some other ways in which the revenue can be increased, and not just go on looking at taxing, increasing taxes?
Ishwari, why did you say the tax to GDP ratio is not good?
It's not so great.
Because this is the best tax to GDP ratio after FY08.
It's improved, but then it's not.
It is approaching 12%. In FY08 we had 12.1%.
Right? Yeah, but it's been about there. Yeah. Not improved too much.
What we should look at it. Do we want more taxes from GST and customs? Because if you talk to anybody, any student or practitioner of public policy or public finance, Professor Gulati just said 3,700 and 17,000 per household monthly income at rural area. If our indirect taxes grow faster, we are taxing them badly compared to we people. Yeah, it's regressive. You have to have the your indirect tax composition or contribution to the tax should be lower. In FY21 it reversed, right? That was 1 year after a long time when the indirect taxes were more and direct was less because the incomes were affected. So it is a good sign that our contribution or share of indirect taxes is going down, direct taxes is going up. The second point, why indirect tax is going down? If we had last year consumption growth, PFCE growth of 4%, we had investment growth of 4%, the phenomenal 8.2% GDP growth came at the GBA growth of 7.2%. The difference between GDP and GBA growth of 93 basis points was unheard of. If you track data from, I think, national income estimates are available from 1950-51. It will be difficult to trace a year when that gap was so large. Generally, that gap remains around 20 to 30 basis points. If you go to forget FY21 onward, because these are all abnormal years, system is still stabilizing. It hasn't stabilized yet, right? Though you can have different methods, different ways, you can say you have come out of the COVID, but that the loss that has not yet recovered, and that will never be recovered, the loss which we had in FY21. When your consumption is growing at 4%, your investment is going at 4%, do you expect the GST growth to be more than 10%? Very unlikely. Rupee is very stable. Rupee is very stable. Global commodity prices are not growing. They are in fact either stable or coming down, right? Now the imports are also not growing. Yeah, maybe now the gold import will start again, and that will push up your custom duty collection. But these are the two major things because of which you are done. Now the major things, and if you go and what Vijay Kelkar used to say, right? Or if you talk to M. Govinda Rao, he will tell you that the kind of reforms we have done on the direct taxes side, right from 1991, right? That is paying us result right now. Because most of you must be furnishing your income tax return. Gone are the days from, I think, early 2000, then you had to wait for the income tax return and go and bribe somebody. So that if you are, and it's everybody knows it, whether one says it or not, if your refund was 10,000, you have to give 1,000 rupee to get the 10,000 rupee refund. Now those days are gone. You get within 1 month, you get your refund, right? And the kind of buoyancy, now GST still stabilizing. Unfortunately, government is saying now, I think we'll not get monthly GST collection numbers. We don't know how much of the buoyancy in last 2 years we have got because A, the change in tax rate, and B, the plugging the loopholes. So with plugging the loophole, if we are able to grow at 10% or so in GST collection, and if your consumption demand is hitting your GDP growth, right? Your investment demand is not that strong. Expecting a custom and GST collection to grow faster is unrealistic. So the kind of reform we had on direct taxation side, we have to have the similar on indirect taxation side to bring up or lift our tax to GDP ratio, which by global standard is abysmal, is very low.
Just Ms. Smith, just one question to you about the package for the exporters and all the customs duty cut that were done. So what's your view on that? Is it going to help the exporting community?
Custom duty is one part. We have a target of $1 billion, we have a target of $1 billion, exports from the country, and we still face as an industry a lot of disabilities. We talked about subsidy in the agriculture, but there is so much cross-subsidization because of which the industry has to bear the higher freight costs and so on and so forth, electricity, etc. So I think that is something which needs to be looked at. The budget does talk about the factors of production to be looked at, in next 6 months, some review to be done. So hopefully some of those disabilities, if well recognized, and we can come out with some solutions to it. It's not going to be an easy task. And then of course, you talked about the countries going inwards, and that's a lot because of the non-tariff barriers, etc., which are coming in, new regulations like CBAM, which are we are still unraveling those. So those proactive measures from the government side on understanding these and dealing with those aspects. We've done some studies on NTPs and we shared with the ministry. I think they were very happy with that. But so there is, I think government is cognizant to this, but we need the trade desks to look at it
very fast and see how we can handle it. Of course, more of FTAs and CPAs. We are going that path, but need to accelerate. We need to see what is advantageous to us, because our studies show that FTAs in the past have not really worked in the favor of Indian industry. So how do we do that? Today also the percentage of use by the exporters of FTA is very, very small. I think the maximum that we saw was the Australia one, because it's been done in a manner which the exporters are able to use well. So nearly about, I think 70% of the exporters are using the FTA, whereas the average that we have seen is not more than 20-24%. So those kind of FTAs where the involvement of industry is there to understand what will work well for us, and a lot of I think awareness and education amongst the businesses and exporters around that. So that's very important. And I think compliance is perhaps, ease of compliances is also something which is very important. So those kind of maybe the technology, etc., that can further improve the compliances. Those are some of the aspects that our exporters keep talking about, industry really looks at. So a lot of those things can probably help us achieve the export targets that we're looking at. Of course, custom duty is good, and they're looking at more of self-reliance and also looking at areas where we can strengthen our domestic production. So that's good and can help create a good value, strong value chain. But there are other aspects that I'm sure government is looking at, but also need to be kind of accelerated.
Okay, thank you. So one last question from me to maybe one or two panelists can answer. The 10.5% nominal GDP growth projection for FY25, sir, Bala sir. So what do you think about it? It's conservative or realistic, or what's in your opinion?
I think the way the government has been functioning is you under-promise, over-deliver. I think every last 3-4 years I have been saying, both from the government point of view, they have been overachieving what they have been estimating it. And one such example I will give you. Fiscal deficit target have been met, rather been reduced by 20 basis points without doing a PSU divestment. We always used to ask a question, how much of PSU divestment you are going to do meet your target? And PSU divestment, nothing much has happened, but they are meeting the target. Therefore, the similar situation may arise as far as the GDP number as well. The nominal GDP number would also be a similar number, I would say, as assume. As we have seen in even the market as well, the earning potential of the company is the first time ever the last 2 years. Most of the analyst community have been predicting the results of the companies lower than what they have been, reality they have been delivering. So companies have been beating the analyst expectations, not just only in India, even globally as well. So I think that's being the case, even the government also has setting a similar kind of trend.
Dr. Patnaik, what do you think about the 10.5% number?
I think conservative budgeting has been the norm in the recent years, and that is clearly paying. Because we must keep in perspective the extent of consolidation we had achieved in the pre-global financial crisis period. And that is also the period when we had the highest average growth rate, with the best fiscal consolidation that we achieved that time. That time the consolidation was the result of high growth. But this time what is happening, it is the consolidation which is led by both from revenue side and expenditure side adjustments. And that is supporting growth. So what I'm saying, last time the causation was different. It was benefiting from strong growth. But this time the fiscal consolidation itself is going to support growth. Because as he himself mentioned, 30 to 40 basis point reduction in cost of capital for the entire economy, I think it's a huge benefit to growth. And on top of that, they are also changing the resource allocation. The very fact that you are directing more resources towards capex, you are incentivizing states to go for more capex, that also is leading to better resource deployment. So both lower deficit and the possibility of remaining within the target because of conservative budgeting and proper direction of resources towards more productive purposes. So that is helping in the entire economy, benefiting in terms of growth impulses. So I think this process is a good one and it should continue. Thank you.
Okay, so with that I'll open the floor for any questions from the audience. So looks like there are no questions. So shall we wrap up then? Okay, thank you so much everyone for listening in. I hope you had a good, you had a lot of takeaways from this discussion. Thank you once again.
Everyone, a thunderous round of applause. What an interesting discussion that was on the post-budget analysis. Now, may I request our moderator, Lokeshwari Madam, data editor of Businessline. Ma'am, please do the honors of presenting a small token of gratitude from our side to our very esteemed panelists. And yes, as we present the memento, requesting everyone to join in. Gratitude to Professor Ashok Gulati, sir. Thank you so much for those very important insights, especially pertaining to the agrarian scenario. Gratitude, sir. Many thanks to Mr. A. Balasubramanian, sir. Sir, many thanks for all the important insights. Many thanks to Madam Jyoti Vig. Ma'am, greetings and once again, many thanks. Many thanks and gratitude to Dr. D.K. Pant, D.K. Pant, sir, many thanks. And lastly, but surely not the least, gratitude Dr. Sitikanta Patnaik, sir. Many thanks, sir. Gratitude once again to our very erudite moderator. Round of applause for Lokeshwari Bedi ma'am too. Ma'am, thank you so much. Requesting everyone for a group photograph. Once again, Lokeshwari ma'am, everyone requesting for a group photograph. So what an interesting discussion this was. Post-budget analysis happening at the Hindu Businessline, Decoding the Budget 2024. Thank you once again to our moderator and our very erudite esteemed panelists. Now may I request Satish sir, who's our national sales heads for events, to join us here and tender the vote of thanks. Satish sir, please. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Good evening all. Today's event, Businessline Decoding event, is one of the premium event when it comes to Businessline, because post-budget there is a lot of queries, Q&A expected, how to answer this budget in a very clear format. And we are happy that Businessline is the only newspaper to host this decoding of the budget event at FICCI. And for this event, a lot of planning has happened from the editorial side. Many thanks to our editor, Raghuvar Srinivasan, Chief of Bureau from Delhi, Purnima Joshi, and the entire team of Businessline from Delhi Bureau working on this decoding of the budget. And also I'd like to thank FICCI, the entire team of FICCI who has supported us for this event, giving us this awesome auditorium hall. Also like to thank our sponsors, NABARD, LIC and GIC for supporting us on this occasion. Thanks to this lovely audience who are present here and to witness this event. Do read Businessline. You'll get to see the whole inside of today's discussion in tomorrow's Businessline. Thank you so much.